Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Uwe J. I'm the green editor of the German weekly Zeit, and I have the honor and pleasure of doing this conversation with Alex Karp, co-founder and CEO of Palantir. Something I've really been looking forward to. Alex, can we start with a very easy question, which may then turn out to be not so easy for some people. What do you do? What does Palantir do, and what does it not do?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here. It's high stakes since it's an audience composed of people I know or know of, and so that always makes it harder because I'm going to get the negative ratings from all my answers. So, there's always been this thing about Palantir, which is partly understandable, like shadowy company, works with intelligence services and lots of industry. And there's an easy answer to what we do, which is like we're a data integration platform which provides software that's actually operational. But the truth is, the real answer involves which product you're buying. If you're buying the Intel product, which has kept, in all modesty, Europe and many other Western countries and some non-Western countries largely safe from terrorism with the help of some people maybe potentially in this room, by providing a platform where you can find terrorists and organized crime while protecting civil liberties. That's one thing we do. That's what we became famous for. That's a very well-known product, especially used in highly regulated Europe. We have a number of products we built, and we're in the actual shadow world of the military that we mostly have not talked about. Products that for special operators, so they can map their operations, so they can share their data, so they can get data from space, so that they come home alive and well, and occasionally other people don't. We built a commercial product that first failed, and we built a second commercial product. If you're COVID vaccinated in an English-speaking country, America and England most notably, you got your vaccine because it was distributed in Foundry. It was also the product that powers Airbus, powers a lot of activities at Credit Suisse, heavy industry. And then we have a bunch of products that are kind of Germanic. You have to be highly technical to understand why you need them, like Apollo, which allows you to work on-prem as if you were working off-prem and provide preventative maintenance to your software, that are very hard to understand but actually power your life. And that all comes under the rubric of a company we're not particularly communicative. And so we get this reputation of being a little bit in the shadow of the night, and some of that sometimes is justified, sometimes it's not.
I have to say, you interpreted a lot into my easy question of things that I hadn't said yet, but might have, and now they're off the table. The shadowy part of what you're doing turned out to be rather bright this year, because you seem to be involved also in Ukraine, in helping the Ukraine military, correct?
We can't talk about anything we're involved in that region, and I would say, like in the case of anti-terror, the most important actors in the Ukraine are the Ukrainian citizens. We have some Ukrainian citizens here and some representatives. I think all of us, certainly I, look at them and not only reflect on their heroism, but hope and wonder if we would have the same degree of heroism if we were in the same situation. Something none of us hopefully will ever have to find out. What I can say is that there's, I think, a turning point in the art of war, because if you look at, the U.S. spending on military is about $800 billion. Russian spending on military is about $65 billion. But I think China's, is roughly $300 billion. But people look at the American spend and wonder, could they do the same thing for much less money? And that, I think, has led people to really underestimate the value of what will actually happen if you have heroes, which are the most important component, relatively simple kinetic things that blow things up, and an ability to organize where those things go. And that combination has shown, and by the way, the other shift is people tend to think of offense, defense, but it's really unclear whether this is offense as defense or defense as offense, but it's very clear that the courageous, kinetic plus software side of this is much, much more powerful than anyone would have realized. And I think that's just going to shape the way people, it also, by the way, means small countries can outperform big countries. It means that considerations of countries wanting to invade other countries will be very different in the future.
it's a hybrid war in many ways. So your software can protect against, by bringing together all kinds of data, of information, making things clear, easily usable. So it can protect against all kinds of things, military attacks, terrorism, and so on. Can it also help, sort of in a positive way, solve problems of the world? You know, since I'm involved in this subject so much, can it help solve sustainability?
Well, you know, there's a technical software aspect to this, which is how do you track a molecule from its coming out of the ground usually, and its transformation into the supply chain, through the supply chain into products, and how do you calculate that? That's a software problem. By the way, non-software people might view it as an easy software problem, but it's actually quite hard because it's a very similar reason it's very hard to find terrorists without violating civil liberties. You have to be able to take apart the data and reconcatenate it and across systems that are not built to communicate, and when they are maybe communicate too much. So there's a huge heavy lifting piece that involves software here, and one of our products, Foundry, is ideally built for that, and obviously that's something that we all care about, and I think you'll see that we're increasingly involved in that space.
So you already mentioned that there's a certain skepticism about Palantir, also because we don't know all you do and can't know all you do. But there's this dichotomy because, on the other hand, you claim to have very strong values and you make them known too. Can you talk a little bit about the ingrained values of Palantir?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's some banalities, like we actually make an effort to say what we think in public, which may not sound too courageous sitting on a stage in Davos, but
no, to a journalist this sounds like terrific.
And so just being open and relatively honest about what one thinks is an act of courage nowadays. We've been doing this since inception. Like if you look at, just an example, some of the products we built, most notably PG, when we built PG, this is post 9/11, really no one cared about data protection. We spent an extra 2 years building data protection at the core of that product and all of our other civilian products. And so, and then we've made hard choices. We haven't worked in certain countries ever. We didn't have to pull out of Russia, as an example. We've made decisions to not work in certain countries where we could work, and you could say, well, that's easy. Well, tell your investor that you've just cut the addressable market from their perspective in half, while telling them you're not planning to go public, and then try to survive with the job. We have walked away from deployments. We were the first to speak out against a Muslim database in America, which presumably people somehow thought we would build. We were the first people, I believe, to explain to Silicon Valley publicly, not over a cocktail party, that we were not going to support the parasitic nature of building companies. We were the first people to do that, speak with our feet. We left Silicon Valley. We did a DPO, which basically means I took a huge risk of becoming broke, which is my own risk, because if you do an IPO, they kind of give you a sum ahead of time.
But you didn't.
No, we did a DPO.
Yeah, I'm just saying so you didn't.
And we didn't. And then, I was on record warning my fellow progressive Trump was going to win. Also on record saying I thought that he was not going to be the best president with graphic terms. It just goes on and on and on and on. Also, internally, some people here internally, these are among the most talented, or if not the most talented people I know, also the most difficult people I know. Yeah, there's a corner over there. I'm talking about you guys, 3+ partner. I'm sure that's also difficult. Maybe there are others. It's like, one of the more courageous things you can do is stand up in front of Palantirians and explain to them why they're wrong. See if you survive that. It'll definitely sharpen your intellectual weapons.
One of the internal conflicts did arise during the Trump administration when you decided to further work for ICE, correct?
Absolutely.
And how did that pan out?
Well, first of all, ICE, not everyone may know what ICE is. ICE is essentially the institution in America that is well known for being in customs or border control, although they do a lot of other things which Palantir is used for, like stop human trafficking, prevent drugs from coming to America like fentanyl, almost all human trafficking in America is actually stopped by ICE, but they are responsible for the deportation of people in America who are undocumented. Our product is primarily not used for that, actually, although we also, avoid kind of what I would call, white-tooth Disneyland marketing. It is used primarily for deporting undocumented felons, but people were correct to point out that while you're deporting undocumented felons, you may notice that people who are not felonious also get deported, and that's a real issue in America. Important to say in this context that that is actually not an issue in Europe. Germany, as an example, quite happily and according with the law, does deport you if you're in the country without a visa. I lived in the country in Germany with a visa for many years, but that was a very important and difficult issue. But it was also, quite frankly, much more difficult because, of course, they were using our software for the same thing under President Obama and currently under President Biden. The real issue was people trusted that Trump would do the wrong thing. And then there's a real question of, if you're in conformity with the law, but the actor is someone you don't trust, is the law still the law? That was the core issue, and lots of Palantirians were either unhappy with the fact that we didn't back down, or quite frankly unhappy with the fact that they, like me, were being protested every day. Nothing like the warm welcome of a protest to wake you up in the morning for a year to clarify your views, and that clarified our views, and it was a hard decision. I'm glad we didn't back away. I would say part of the reason we didn't back away, though, is because Silicon Valley has every excuse for never backing forward. Like, there's always a reason in Silicon Valley why Silicon Valley cannot help the West, cannot help America, can't help your governments, but can export the highest quality revenue to their company and get a 50 multiple on it and capture a lot of personal value. And I believe that, I obviously understood and understand that America is like any large institution and it needs to be critiqued. But in general, I believe that the West in general, America as well, play a crucial role in peace and well-being. I think current events kind of show that bias to be largely correct.
Alex, in preparing for this conversation, I talked to a number of people at Palantir. There was a little, of course, back and forth of information. And I realized again what I had realized before. You're much loved and revered in this company. You also feared in this company.
The feared part, I don't know who you talked to, but
I know you
can, yeah. The revered part, I hope
maybe
that's
not with
true.
the people present, but
maybe
you're very close in the sense that, for example, you do Tai Chi classes at the Palantir headquarters and other things, and yet you also seem at times aloof and far away. So I was wondering, what kind of a leader, what kind of a boss are you?
I paid my bills for a number of years writing papers on Freud because I was basically, trying to be an academic in Germany. So I always wonder, like, when you ask the person, what kind of person are you, even if they're not trying to lie, like, do you get an accurate answer? So, so I don't know the answer to that question. I'm definitely much more of an artist and than a normal human being, and certainly than a normal corporate leader. I think on the positive side, I have very, very strong opinions about people, and I'm willing to fight for them. On the negative side, it's sometimes hard to convince me, and a lot of the ideas I have look very crazy. And I sometimes will avoid where I think my crazy is right, trying to engage in dialogue, and I'll be much more trying to convince the person that the crazy thing will work. But I would say, my parents, very super high IQ and also kind of very like Palantirians, and I think it's like this Sisyphusian thing where you go back to the problem you had as a child, like how do you get your parents to be successful? And so I have this very deep relationship with Palantirians, but it is probably more about getting us to be successful despite our talent. And so, that's kind of a winding answer, but I don't actually know any, yeah.
That's what you get when you ask people what kind of a leader they are, right?
Yeah.
But so you went to Harvard as an undergrad. You went to Stanford Law.
Went to Haverford, which is a somewhat unknown school. That sounds like Harvard, but yes. And I went to Stanford. Yeah.
And you went to Stanford Law, and then you decided, instead of staying in Silicon Valley and becoming rich right away, as some of your fellow students did, you went to Germany to get a PhD in philosophy. Why this detour?
Well, I mean, I was super unhappy at Stanford, and I really thought every day, well, if I'm going to finish the end of this sentence, I'm going to do exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. And what I wanted to do at that point was become an academic, and the only sources that really interested me were Germanic. Now here I'm also including kind of German-speaking writing French people like Durkheim. And I thought, I've just spent a 3-year bid. I got to do something I really want to do. And then that's why I went. I stayed because, I just felt culturally very at home. And it a lot of things where, I obviously have great reverence from America, but, I was never really comfortable exaggerating the nature of my friendship with people, or I didn't really have, I have a number of close friends, but not 50. I like to be alone. Very Germanic things. I don't know how to tell someone I love them after 3 dates. I don't even know what a date is. So it's like
you felt at home.
I felt like I was like, wow, this is like, I thought, because I grew up in America, I just thought that's how everybody is. It's like I didn't know that like there's a whole world where I could just be me, and like I didn't have to explain it. It's like and then I was like, wow, this is incredible. Honestly, if the Sigmund Freud Institute had money to keep me, I would be watching you on TV with some other weird-looking dude, thinking, maybe I can write about Freud and that person.
And yet, then this idea came along, and I think in 2004 you started Palantir. As you said before, it was a bit of a crazy idea at the time. And yet, since 2004 and 2022, that's a long stretch of time, Palantir still hasn't turned out a profit. We heard that probably this year.
Finance people love splitting hairs, but we made money. It's just we comp our people fairly, and if you deduct the comp. But
okay.
If you're running a if you were a lemonade stand, you would have made $424 million in lemonade profits. But you can't use the P word.
Okay. But my question is, compared to other digital companies, it did take a long time. You had to stay on as CEO for a very long time. Is that the nature of the business, or why did it take so long?
Well, it depends if you look at the accomplishment positive or negatively. But, okay, so it takes 5 years for us to build one of our core products. So it took 5 years to build PG, it took 5 years, all these products I mentioned. And then it takes a long time with big enterprises. So, build product is 5 years. Maybe you begin selling it year 4, full productization is year 5. We have a number of products. We work a very complex business. But yes, I think the duration on building enterprise is very different. I do happen to believe that because the duration is long, the longevity is even longer. So but yes, these are very, very complicated enterprise software products we're building, and even if you are the best in the world at it, you're going to take 3 years to get them so you can ship them, and another 1.5 years before they're fully productized. And we have 5 products.
As you've said before, you try to speak out loud on your perspectives, and one of them is that many of the Silicon Valley companies, the famous platforms for one, they are not really aligned with consumer needs. You've actually scolded them on a number of occasions. What's your problem with Google and Facebook?
Well, it's not particularly with one or the other, or one or the other more than the other. It's a cultural, I'm making a cultural critique that Silicon Valley One, which built dual-use technologies, which were primarily built for the military and then shipped to consumers, which made us healthier, wealthier, more peaceful. And I think as a logical consequence led to a radical decline in, activist views like, racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. That Silicon Valley too figured out you could just throw out that framework and jump right to being parasitic. And the parasitic nature of what Silicon Valley likes basically is the host decides it loves the taste of its own destruction or decline and will pay with its own product, whether that's data or enterprise data or something, to the tune of the high value revenues. So it's like this matrix-like thing, and it works so well for Silicon Valley and investors in Silicon Valley. You can't critique the player, but we're all paying the price of the game. And so, and you see this all over society. And I don't view this critique as being particularly insightful now, but it surprises me that we were like the first to really talk about it openly. And I really hope that Silicon Valley moves back at least to a hybrid where the products actually deliver some value, not just to Silicon Valley participants.
So did this make you so unpopular that you actually had to move the company to Colorado, or?
Well, there's a lot of reasons to move to Colorado, and one of them is it's nice when your neighbors like you. It's kind of nice. It's so surprising to show up in Colorado. If you're like, oh, you're Palantir, great. So yeah, it's very enjoyable.
It has been said that you're kind of a leftist. But when I look at your different stances on different issues, it's kind of hard to really make out, which may be a nice thing, what really, where you really stand politically. You're strong on defense, very outspokenly so.
That's a leftist position in my view.
So you do call yourself a leftist, is that?
Absolutely. I believe I'm certainly in the intellectual tradition of the left. What is that? The intellectual tradition of the left is, first of all, a tradition that believes in quantifying things, does believe that we should decrease violence, believes that workers should participate in the means of production, means that people should participate, which in my view means they should have some participation in the economy and ability to participate in all areas of society, and should be able to prove themselves and do well like everyone else. Now, if you define leftist as something which arguably is not leftist, yeah, sure, you could argue I'm not a leftist, but then I would say historically, if you look at what left of center has meant intellectually, I'm pretty squarely on the left. And of course, there is, historically 40 to 50% of our revenue comes from outside of America. And in America, I'm definitively a leftist. In say, Germany or Switzerland, I probably would be kind of center-right. But then center-right people in Switzerland and in Germany see as given that poor people will be well educated, that older poor people will be taken care of, that everyone has a pair of teeth in the front of their mouth.
I do believe that we still count as communists in Texas. If you're a leftist, of course, you teamed up to found Palantir, among other people, with a rightist, which is Peter Thiel. Sort of a libertarian rightist. Is this clash of political views a problem?
Well, we've been fighting about politics since we met at Stanford. I always think that these things are a problem if there's some kind of surprise, or if you're committed to only having friends that agree with you. So we always disagreed politically. We still disagree on a lot of issues politically. We do, in my opinion, seem to have a somewhat similar view of what things and how things in although not always the same, and that's quite helpful. What it means to build a business, what a successful business will look like, and things that are perhaps more ephemeral but more relevant to our business. And the fact that we don't agree politically, I think it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah, and you come to the same conclusions, right? Like turning your back on Silicon Valley. Peter went to LA, you went to Colorado.
Yeah, but not always on politics, but there is. You can have similar assumptions and a different interpretation of those assumptions. Now, we don't always have similar assumptions, but there is, like in this Venn diagram, an overlap of assumptions. There's often not an overlap of conclusions in the political realm, and and a pretty healthy discourse on the business side. Although I would say, Steph and Peter and I have made a formidable team in the last couple of years, and both of them I view as good friends. Im Sinne from Deutsch, nicht nur so kind of, they're actual friends.
Freunde, so to speak. Excellent.
Yeah.
Like the way we serious Germans describe them. Do you like for the state to play a big role in society?
Well, I mean, it depends on what. But like I like institutions that are competent playing a bigger role. So if you say, do you like the state playing a big role? I would say, well, of course the state has to play a role in certain issues, and the size of the role should be directly proportional to the level of competence. So I believe part of the reason why I also think I'm on the left is, we're certainly a modernist and not a postmodernist, which is maybe orthogonal left-right, is I believe in reforming the institutions as they are, or in the assumptions that they will stay in our life, and that reforming these institutions is key to ameliorating many of the social ills we have.
And would you, like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, like to pay higher taxes than you do?
I think the tax, not tax, I'm not against taxes, and I don't spend a lot of time optimizing on them, which, but I think the real issue for Western societies is how functional are the institutions? Like, it's very easy if you're, maybe like me and you're not highly tax optimizing, and like, my hobbies are cross-country skiing, Tai Chi. How many pairs of cross-country skis can I buy?
But how many teachers can you buy? I mean, you can make it expensive and less expensive, right?
Yeah, but no matter how creative you are, I can afford my cross-country skiing. It's
happy to hear it.
But I think the key thing, that's why I think software is so crucial. These institutions, part of the instability of the West is a legitimation crisis, to quote a famous term. The average person does not know what they're getting from their institutions, and to the extent they know, they're not happy. You change that, and by the way, change it doesn't mean finding terrorists without data protection. It means finding terrorists with data protection. It doesn't mean fighting wars because you can win. It means being so strong no one fights with you. That you get citizens who are happier, more peaceful, and more tolerant, and that's just, that's a better way for all of us to live.
If you look at, from America to Europe again, to where you like to live and do spend a lot of time in the German-speaking world, we seem to be behind in terms of digital progress, innovation, startups, and so on. What can we actually learn from the place that you turned your back on?
What's
Silicon Valley?
Yeah. We'll just take Germany, because as we know, it's Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Liechtenstein are very different cultures. Germans, companies and political officials come to America and are presented with a company, and they're like, oh, well, we're smarter than them, and true or not, we're going to go home and build a science project. And since we're smarter and better at the science, our science product will be better. This isn't primarily science. This is primarily art. Go get the people who've built the art. Many of them are actually German and German-speaking, not all, studied in Germany, have a life in Germany, and get them to build companies, artistic-like companies here. And I tell people this, and again, I've been warned by our PR department that's always unhappy with me. Stop spending money. The money will follow. Every time you get all these calls from countries I care a lot about, we're going to spend 10 billion euros. Yeah. Well, after you have a consortium of consultants who've never built a company telling you how to build a company, how are you going to do that? How about hand out some passports? Tell people to come back. Call them personally. Get them. It's like, I said this before, I'm just quoting myself, which is always obnoxious. Germany has one of the best tech scenes in the world. It's just in Canada and Silicon Valley. It's not in Germany. You change that. And by the way, there's the sense of urgency. You know, it's not there. And instead of getting people who are creative and interesting, you have too many consultants, too much money, and these copies of American tech companies. What does it say about this incredible culture that, you know, there's the people who are creative and tolerant and interesting are building some of the best companies in Canada and America, and you get these, you know, not always, but often third-rate copies of a wonderfully interesting company, and billions of dollars in spend. And by the way, why is it important to Europe and Germany and other countries? And it's like the modality of how you build these businesses will at some point be determined by software execution. Just like everything else, just like wars and what you buy and how you look at it, there is really no reason why this region is not the second best region in the world. But unless there's urgency, and urgency means focusing on what actually makes it work, which are people who often look batshit crazy, moving to America, get those people to move back.
All right. Well, Alex, for one, I'm really happy that the Germans didn't deport you, even though you only had a visa. Thank you very much for this broad conversation. I think we got a good idea about the man and the company. Thank you very much.
Thank you.